Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey. Thank you for joining us again this week. Today we're going to discuss a very important topic for you all. I'm here with attorney Patrick Smith of the Smith Law Firm in Augusta, Georgia. And we have a great show in store discussing all things related to elder law. Patrick, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me, Jean.
First of all, let's start by telling the audience a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in elder law specifically.
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. You ask that of any elder law attorney. There's not many of us out there. But I got into elder law when my grandmother went through the different phases of needing care, through at home, through assisted living, up to nursing home. And there were just no one. I was an attorney at the time. This was a long time ago, but I was a relatively new attorney, and there were no answers that I could get. No one focused in this area. And I had to start seeking out those answers, and I realized that there was such a void in terms of help for people searching for answers in this area of the law. How do we get care paid for? How do what do we do? There are a lot of unknowns. These are things that we don't face on a regular basis in life. We all pay our taxes and things like that if we owe taxes every year, but you deal with these types of things once in a lifetime usually, maybe twice. And that's how I actually got into it. And in terms of background on me, we've got our Augusta office here. We also have two other offices in Georgia, in Conyers, just outside of Atlanta, and in Warner Robins, serving the middle Georgia area. And, we've been focusing on this for over 10 years, and it's the focus of our practice, helping people deal with the issues of aging and long-term care and how to plan for that. Another piece of what we do is special needs planning. We help families that have disabled or special needs children plan for how we're going to provide for them in the future, if the parents are gone, and that's a likely scenario down the road for anyone that has a family member like that.
And, I'm so glad that, I worked in hospice for a very, very long time, and that's a personal story, too. I was working in a big financial firm in Boston with a corner office and 2 secretaries, and I got involved with hospice after helping care for a loved one who was on hospice, and basically gave up a career and had a passion and a heart for it, and ran into the hospice arena, really not knowing anything about healthcare at the time. And I love hearing that your story that drove you to the path that you're on was a personal story as well, because I think that lends to just a more genuine passion and energy for learning what needs to be learned in order to do the best job possible for your clients. So happy to have you on today. And again, there still aren't a lot of elder lawyers out there, as you said, and there's so much to touch upon. While you were talking, just giving your introduction, 4 more questions popped into my head. And for all of those listening, don't turn the channel, because there's so many important things that we need to tell you to plan for the rest of your life. And as you were talking, Patrick, I was thinking, you live your whole life, you contribute to society, you raise your children, you think you've got and I worked in the financial industry, so I used to help people plan their finances as they were having children and college expenses and retirement and all of that. And then when you retire and you get older, sometimes all that planning can kind of go to the wayside because nobody ever told you what to do to protect your assets for when you are in the more mature stages of your life. Isn't that right?
No, absolutely. I mean, you've touched on a lot of important things there. I mean, we do a lot of planning for certain things. Sometimes we overlook that one thing, that what happens to me in retirement. And to me, this is a flavor of estate planning that we do, but it's not the typical type of estate planning for for what happens after you're gone. I'm worried about my clients for what happens to them while they're alive. Mm-hmm. And we often plan for those things that you pointed out. Plan for the financial part of retirement as best we can. Plan for those kids to go to school and sock money away for those types of things. So sometimes we overlook our own long-term care, and perhaps the system is in our thinking is at fault for that, because a lot of people think, well, I get 65, I'll have Medicare, and I'll have a supplemental Medicare insurance plan through a private provider, and I'll be covered. What they don't know is that, yeah, that will take care of doctor and hospital stuff, but it absolutely doesn't scratch the surface and help at all in terms of long-term care if we need it in the future. And all the statistics will tell you that, you know, depending on which studies you look at, that maybe 1 out of every 2 people over 65 will need some form of long-term care in their lifetime. And that may be a little bit of time in rehabilitation, or it could be 10 years, you know, in a care community, you know, due to Alzheimer's or dementia.
And it can be very debilitating, especially for those stricken with Alzheimer's or dementia. I mentioned my grandmother at the opening of the show. She's the reason I actually went into hospice. I was helping care for her. But exactly what you just said, she planned. She was a very independent woman for her age. Not that they weren't independent, but she was forward thinking and managed her finances and sought a financial planner and had everything where it needed to be and lived a wonderful life. Well, and then, as you know, in the last few years of life is usually when you spend the most dollars on your health.
Absolutely.
And she was in and out of the hospital 5 times over a 6-month period. And we didn't really understand why. Well, she had chronic heart failure, and she was spreading out her medications because that was the year 2000 when all the changes in medication coverage was coming through, and insurance went through all kinds of changes. And even though she had planned financially for her future, she had everything down to the T. How much am I going to leave my daughters and my son? How much am I going to leave my grandchildren? Yet for her daily living, she didn't have enough money to pay for her medications that she now needed to be on. She didn't want to touch what she had already done with an estate planner. And so this poor woman started spreading out her medications to help make them last longer and ended up in the hospital with upper respiratory infections, which is debilitating for a chronic heart failure patient because you never get back to where you were. And it's so frustrating to me. And it's one of the reasons I left the financial world to go into hospice to try to help educate people much sooner about all things related to end-of-life care. So let's talk about that. How can people protect themselves or plan better for their future while they're still here?
Well, you know, it's multifaceted in terms of what people can do, but it's a huge problem that people just really need to face. And before we talk about that, you know, one of the things that I find both good and bad about the lion's share of people that come to see me, Gene, is that they're more worried about what they leave for their kids than they are themselves. And I try to force them to have a conversation about turning that around, and let's take care of you. We're going to also take care of the kids by taking care of you, but let's make sure that we've done some planning to take care of you first. And the things that people can do is simply get with a trusted professional to plan your estate ahead of time. You know, we use different types of trusts and different types of planning to protect them, not only their assets, but we're protecting them by protecting their assets. You know, if you think about the cost of long-term care in those later years, as you mentioned, you know, it can be between $5,000 and $10,000 a month. So it can be dissipated, that life savings, a lot quicker than they put it away. They probably weren't putting away $5,000 or $10,000 a month. Probably took a lot longer to put that little savings nest egg away. And by doing some proactive estate planning, it's focused not on, you know, what happens after we're gone. It addresses that as well. But focusing on what happens while we're alive, and the planning can be tailored to do those types of things. I'm also a huge fan, though I don't sell it and have no interest in it financially or anything like that because I'm an attorney, in long-term care insurance. You know, the people that you're talking about that we meet with on a daily basis, you know, they're very self-reliant, self-sufficient, planning for their own retirement, and that's a piece of that, planning for long-term care, you know, and if you're young enough, you know, and don't have pre-existing conditions and things like that, you can get that. You know, it's not an inexpensive thing to get, but it's worth its weight in gold down the line. And that can work in conjunction, that long-term care insurance can work in conjunction with your estate planning that does asset protection as well.
And I have so many questions about that too, but you may not be the person to ask, but in terms of long-term care insurance, isn't there kind of a middle ground where it might not be the best option? Because if you make too much money, do you know the ins and outs of long-term care? I should have probably.
Well, I know a good bit about it, you know, and there's what you need is to if you're looking at long-term care insurance, you need to shop it around. And you need to find someone who takes an interest in that individual's personal situation. You know, not everyone needs a Cadillac. You know, if you have $4,000 per month of retirement income, or that's what you think you will have from Social Security pensions and things like that, you may not need a plan that will pay $6,000 a month. You may need just enough to supplement your income to pay for that level of care. So there is a middle ground in getting it too early. You know, some people may advise against that because it does cost. But, you know, there's a certain age range that different insurance professionals will tell you is your, so to speak, wheelhouse for getting long-term care insurance.
Do you know what the I guess, typical age is that people should be looking at long-term care
I see
insurance?
people starting to look at it in the late 40s.
Late 40s.
Throughout their 50s and in their early 60s. And when you start getting beyond the early 60s, you can still get it, but that's when we start running the risk of having a pre-existing condition crop up, or a condition crop up that will prohibit the underwriting of that type of long-term care policy. I will, of course, defer to those professionals that actually know that, but that's what I see out there. I've had some people that were 70 in the early 70s still be able to get it because they were in good health. It would be more expensive at that point in time, but
really,
the industry is a funny industry, and they have lots of products out there, too many for me to keep up with. As you might have known from your formal financial advisor life, perhaps, there are different products out there that have long-term care riders in terms of investment products that are actually investment products that, for instance, there are some annuities, and I'm not an annuity person, but there are some annuities that perhaps, you know, have a long-term care rider to them. So if you had to exhaust that little piece of savings, the long-term care rider might pay something towards long-term care. So, you know, that's in the financial and insurance world, and there's just a myriad of products out there to help, you know, people deal with those future potential issues of long-term care that they just really need to look into.
Yeah, and it seems like just as I was leaving the financial industry, the long-term care insurance was the hot button. And I was happy to see it come because it is such an issue as I'm facing it right now as I work in the health industry.
One thing we're seeing, Gene, about long-term care insurance is that a lot of the companies, some of them are getting out of that business. And so there are fewer companies right now writing long-term care insurance than there were 2 years ago.
Huh.
And perhaps that's a function of cost. Perhaps that's a function of their actuaries not doing proper actuarial work and pricing those plans properly. But there are several companies that are big names that have gotten out of that. I won't name any names, of course, but it's a little, you have a little less of a selection now, and some of the big names are still out there, you know, writing those types of long-term care policies.
And I can assume, based on what you just said, there's a great need for long-term care.
There is.
And that's why these companies are getting out of it. They underestimated the need, and it's expensive. And so, again, more reason to have you on the show today and help our listeners prepare as much as possible for their future. And we hope no one has to end up in a long-term care facility, but many do. And the average length of stay is somewhere around 18 months. So at $5,000 to $10,000 a month, that could be $100,000.
That's right. Some say 18 months, some say 2.5 to 3 years. So, in terms of the average stay in long-term care, so not planning for it is taking a pretty big gamble.
Wow. Okay, so one of the things people need to do is see a financial planner and talk to folks about long-term care insurance and whether it's a good product for them.
Yeah, the financial planner is an important piece of their planning whole portfolio in terms of making their money work for them, you know, into their retirement and being, you know, focused towards one goal. I see a lot of people, Gene, that come to me and they don't have a financial advisor. They've done a great job putting the money away, but it may not be working, you know, in a proper way for them or towards one actual goal that's focused towards them. So the financial advisor can help with that, but also talk to them about those long-term care insurance issues that are so important.
So let's talk about Medicaid as well, because if you have, I mean, a lot of people don't have thousands of dollars a month when they retire. And
No, that's right.
And so, maybe long-term care insurance is not the best option for them because as they get older, they may well qualify for Medicaid.
That's true. So Medicaid, when we're talking in the long-term care arena, well, let me back up. There are a lot of different forms of Medicaid, from, temporary assistance for needy families, for younger folks, certain housing programs or Medicaid programs. But then there's the long-term care program, what we call the ABD program in Georgia, the Age, Blind, and Disabled, Medicaid program. And that's the one that will pay for, chronic long-term care issues. Most often in a nursing community, there are also home-based waiver programs that Medicaid will pay for. It's funded at a lesser degree than the nursing home program is. The nursing home program and the budget items of each state are kind of must-pays, whereas each state allocates a certain amount of funds towards its home-based programs. In Georgia, we call the typical one we'd be looking at is the Community Care Services Program, or CCSP for short. There are a few others, but that's the primary one for the home-based Medicaid. But the financial requirements for those programs that pay for long-term care, whether the CCSP program or the nursing home program, are virtually the same. And in terms of financial qualification for Medicaid, if we want to delve into that, Medicaid looks at two financial issues. They look at a person or a couple's income, and then they look at their assets, the things that they own and whatnot, to see whether they qualify.
And the reason why I'm bringing you down this path is because when you end up with a dementia diagnosis, a lot of times a patient with dementia, families try to keep them at home as long as possible. And it's a long, hard journey for caregivers. And oftentimes their loved one needs to go into a facility for safety reasons.
No, absolutely. Alzheimer's and dementia is my pet project, so to speak, for me in terms of where I give my time. I'm on the board of the Alzheimer's Association here locally, and it's where I devote my time and resources in terms of what I'm fighting, because I think, number one, it's one of the worst diseases that's out there that a person can possibly ever get. It is ultimately terminal at this point in time. We hope for a cure, and we fight for that all the time through our funds and our advocacy. But you're right. I mean, it's very tough, to make those decisions when it becomes basically unsafe for that person to be at home and they have to transition to a long-term care type of facility, perhaps assisted living with a memory care unit, perhaps it's nursing home care. But it's extremely difficult for the family to deal with that. But more, as importantly, it could be extremely long-term.
Right. And
we've got to do some planning for that, and we've got to talk about Medicaid at that point in time. And how do we plan for that? And there are a lot of things that we can do, Gene. In my practice, that's one of the focuses is in terms of the asset protection and planning types of things that we do is we're always talking about Medicaid because we know it's going to come into play. So we're trying to work within the federal and state guidelines on what we can do legally to protect a person and their assets.
Right, because if you don't have your act together in terms of your estate planning, there will be no assets left.
Well, that's true. Without planning, the rules are different for a single or widowed or otherwise unmarried individual versus a married couple that has one spouse at home and one spouse that's in long-term care. They're drastically different. In every state, just about, it's for a single or unmarried individual in terms of assets you may have that are what we call countable assets. That limit is only $2,000. So think money in the bank, financial assets, things like that. Some things that are not countable for Medicaid, if we want to have this discussion now, are things like the home. In most states, one car is exempt, perhaps two in other states, but in Georgia, it's one vehicle is exempt and doesn't count against that little limit. Medicaid doesn't care about your personal effects, your furniture and jewelry and things like that that you just own. And every state will allow you a certain amount of assets for burial, be it a prepaid burial plan or life insurance, or just some money up to a certain limit. In Georgia, $10,000 set aside for burial. But really, that's about it. There are certain special rules that apply to things like IRAs and 401ks where we can make those exempt in Georgia, but not all states, where the retirement fund, those qualified funds that someone's put into a retirement plan may not count against them for Medicaid purposes. But one thing we also have to focus on is the estate recovery program. A lot of people don't understand how that works. I've never heard of it. Some people have heard, quote, you might lose your house to Medicaid. And what they're talking about is the estate recovery program. That's ultimately a program that in every state, which is implemented, which should be all states by now under the new laws, is a program that says for every dollar that Medicaid spends on an individual in long-term care, they have a claim against their estate dollar for dollar. So, for instance, if I was a dementia patient or resident at a long-term care community on Medicaid, and let's say I lived there for 40 months, and let's say Medicaid was spending $6,000 a month on me, and I passed away. Well, 40 times 6,000, if my math is correct, is about $240,000. And they would have a claim against my estate.
I'm so glad you did that math.
I hope I got it right.
I'm kidding.
But regardless of whether I got it right or not, that claim would be against that home. So while the home may have been an exempt asset for purposes of whether I could have gotten help in my situation, it would not have kept me from financially qualifying for Medicaid. I might, without proper planning, I might lose that home to the Medicaid estate recovery program.
Lord, I didn't know that.
And so that's an important thing for people to think about, and yet another reason to plan.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to have to take a quick break. So this is such an important topic, and we haven't even talked about VA benefits, trusts, right, advanced directives, all kinds of important information. But so this estate recovery program, again, in and of itself, if that's the only reason, you really need to seek the help of an elder law attorney like Patrick and a financial planner to help you plan. And, I say it on several shows. A few weeks ago, I interviewed someone from the Alzheimer's Association. And one of my biggest things is the day the doctor gives you the diagnosis is the same day the doctor needs to tell you to seek a financial planner. And I wish we could just get that message out because it's a long illness. It's a long-term illness. It's so difficult for the patient, and it's even more difficult sometimes for the caregiver to go through. And so please, if you or a loved one or anyone you know has recently or has been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's or a form of dementia, please, please, please seek out an elder care attorney and a financial planner. And if you're not sure who to go to, I'm sure Patrick can get you in the right direction. Patrick, can you just give a shout out to our audiences about how they can reach you? And we'll take a quick break and come back and talk about more of those important topics we discussed.
Absolutely. They can reach us, primarily on our website, which is www.elderlawyer.com. We've got a wealth of information out there for anyone interested in reading a little bit more about these topic areas: Medicaid, long-term care planning, special needs planning. But our main Augusta office, our phone number is 706-826-1500.
Wonderful. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Jeannie Pete, and again, I'm here with Patrick Smith of the Smith Law Firm in Augusta, Georgia. He also has offices in Conyers and Warner Robins, Georgia. But we are talking about important information for you today about all things elder law. We talked a little bit before the break on long-term care insurance and how important it is to plan your estate ahead of time for the life that you have left to live, not just for what happens to your family when you're gone. we're going to talk this half hour about some of the types of documents that you need to be aware of that should be part of your plan. We're going to talk about VA benefits. And Patrick, I want to get into some special needs questions for you too, because I had an issue over the last week in my travels in some facilities. So let's first start talking about We've discussed the importance of planning ahead and seeking the advice of an elder lawyer and a financial planner. So when you get there, it can be very overwhelming. Can we help simplify some of the hot items that they're going to be talking about with you and kind of navigate them through the system of documents that are important?
Well, sure. I'll start, Jeannie, by telling you kind of the two, at least in the long-term care kind of estate planning arena, the two types of clients that I generally have. Excuse me. I have clients that come to me that are relatively healthy, and I will call them, in my own terminology, a pre-planning client. They're coming, they're worried about the future. There's not a problem right now, or maybe we've just gotten a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. There's not a real problem right now, but we're really worried about the future. And I will call those people pre-planning clients, and they are looking at being proactive and putting in place documentation that's going to be necessary in their estate plan, to provide and to prepare for that future event. It may be something that we know is coming or we're just worried about coming. The other type of client we have is what I will call a crisis planning client. They really haven't planned ahead, and a family may be sitting in my conference room with me discussing options about a parent or spouse or grandparent that is in long-term care now, and they don't have a long time to plan. And unfortunately, Jeannie, I find that between 70 and 85% of my clients are in the crisis planning client category. Unfortunately, I really wish it was reversed, and I'm glad we're doing this, and maybe more people will plan ahead.
Me too. I can't thank you enough. Yeah. I feel so blessed to be able to get folks information before the crisis. We talk about it every week. So help me, help Patrick, flip those percentages around, folks. Don't wait for the crisis. Plan for your future.
That's right. Before the flood, as they say, right?
Right.
Okay. So, in terms of pre-planning and planning ahead, but everybody, whether you're 18 years or 80 years old, needs a few things in place, just the basic things. Everyone needs a will, a last will and testament. Everyone needs a durable power of attorney, which will allow someone to handle your finances and property decisions if you're unable to. And thirdly, a health care directive. Different states call these things different things. For instance, in Georgia, we now call it an advance directive for health care. Up until 2007, we did two separate documents, a health care power of attorney, which said who gets to make medical decisions, and a living will that said, what types of treatment I did or did not want in my end-of-life situations and life-sustaining treatment. Now, in Georgia, and every state's a little different on this, in Georgia, in 2007, the legislature rolled those two documents into this one document called an advance directive for health care. And so, if nothing else, you really have to have, those basic things: a last will and testament, a durable power of attorney, and an advance directive for health care. Now, going beyond those things, Jeannie, in terms of planning for long-term care, every family situation is a little bit different. But, we typically, and we'll often use certain types of trusts to help people plan their estates and
okay, we have so I want to I don't mean to cut you off, but
sure.
I'm not an attorney, and so I'm a question person, of course, which is why I have a radio show and interview people. So I just want to kind of bring you back for 1 minute and delve in a little bit more about what you said about advance directive for healthcare. I'm glad that it's now bundled into one document here in Georgia. So basically what I understood you say is it's going to address the power of attorney, which answers the who is going to be in charge of your care, and the living will, which answers the what, when, how, and details of enacting what your desires are for your health care. Correct?
Absolutely.
And finances?
Correct.
Okay. No, it's just towards health care. So let's talk a little bit more about what to think about when putting together your advanced director for healthcare. And then we'll get into wills and trusts, because here's one thing I've come into contact with being in healthcare for so long. Folks love, you have a spouse or you have a child, and you just need somebody and you trust them to take you to the grocery store and be there for you, and they love you to pieces. But I see so often that people are appointing the wrong person to be their power of attorney for following through on their healthcare wishes. And what I mean by that is the person that might be perfect for you to handle your finances may not be perfect for you to handle your healthcare decisions. Let's say, for instance, you've had a wonderful life. This was my grandmother. Jeannie, dear, I've had a wonderful life. God has been so good to me. I just want to go see Fred. I just want God to take me. She was ready. So you know what? If she appointed me her power of attorney, I would have made sure we didn't go to the ends of the earth with all kinds of unreasonable tests and procedures. But some people just aren't capable of letting go. And so you have to be very careful about who you choose to be your health care power of attorney. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. And I have many families that will choose different family members for different jobs, so to speak, throughout these different documents. For instance, the durable power of attorney for finances and property may be one child, for instance, and the health care directive may name a different child for those health care directives. So it's different people will have different jobs, depending on how large your family is. And you really have to think about those things, as you stated, because, you want your wishes followed. And that's why we're putting to paper your wishes in this document, this advanced directive for health care. And you do have to pick the right people.
Absolutely.
For instance, the Georgia format, in our standard format for this advanced directive for health care, the people you name to make medical decisions for you, ultimately, their decisions can override your actual choices. So we've got to be, for instance, if you named me as your child to be the person making medical decisions and treatment decisions in this document, and you made certain end-of-life decisions, for instance, I do not want certain life-sustaining treatment if I cannot be helped. I could, through my own decision-making, if you appointed me in that document, I could ultimately override those decisions. So it's a very, very important that, number one, you talk with your family and they know what you want. And putting it to paper in this document does a piece of that. But you've got, as you pointed out, you've got to pick the right people who you think are going to follow through with what your wishes are. And
not just to follow through with your wishes, but the repercussions I've seen being in healthcare, especially in large families or a spouse versus a child, if it's not clear and it's a tough topic to talk about with your loved ones, if you don't talk about it and make it known and make it public, what happens, what you've left behind is loved ones that now have a rift because one is in Africa and the other one is in Alaska in terms of what to do with your health care. And you're giving yourself a gift and you're giving your families a gift by communicating it, making sure it's known, and having those discussions so that your loved ones are very clear about how to handle the situation if it should come up.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. It can be very tumultuous with families that have different ideas. If mom or dad did not communicate, verbally or in writing, preferably, their end-of-life types of wishes. And some children may think one way mom would want to be kept alive and for us to fight for her and the others may say, well, mom told me that she never wanted to be, in that type of situation if it ever came to that. And it can be very difficult for a family to come to grips in a big family like that where people have different ideas of what someone wanted. You've got to tell them and talk to them and put it in writing what your wishes are.
And we're talking about elder law, but folks, the day I started in hospice and I was trained on a book called 5 Wishes, which is like a living will, and it's very simple to read, is the day my entire family got the book. I think I was 30s at the time, but it's too much of what I've seen. So don't wait. Don't think, oh, well, this is a show geared towards senior living. Well, sure it is. But this is a show geared towards anybody who has a senior in their circle. And no matter what your age, you should be communicating the what ifs so that, God forbid, you go out and get hit by a car and we're in one of those crisis situations. My family knows I do not want to be held alive on machines and visited by my two sons for the rest of my life. I also
Absolutely.
know, do not ask me to be your power of attorney, Kath, my sister, because I know you want that. I'm not capable of saying yes to that, so don't appoint me in charge.
No, you're absolutely right. You know, and like I said, the things we're talking about now are things that people need in place, whether they're 18 or 80.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've just got to have them because, you know, I see it all the time. You know, people, you know, get into a car wreck, as you pointed out. They're now incapacitated. They're now in a certain state that they didn't plan on being in, and they did not communicate that in writing or orally, you know, to their family. And you just have to do it. You have to let your people know what you want and what you don't want. It makes it so much easier for them, and it is a gift.
It's a gift. Well, thank you for letting me pull you back there because, as you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about some of the experiences that I've had throughout my life in healthcare. And if we can help even just one person and one family, I feel better. So now let's talk about wills and trusts and all that gray area that I certainly still need help understanding.
Well, sure. You know, in terms of trust, you know, we use certain types of, if we're worried about long-term care planning, we're typically going to be using certain types of what we call irrevocable trusts. They're trusts that we can maintain some control over, but they serve a certain purpose, and they have certain terms in them that ultimately can help protect the assets that we place into the trust, protect them from the long-term care, you know, programs that we may be needing to become eligible for down the road. And there's not a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all answer for every family. You know, that's the first point that I like to tell people. You know, your plan may be different than every other plan that we've done. It may be similar, but it could be different. You know, your family makeup is a little bit different. But we may use certain trust vehicles to protect assets from long-term care. Typical revocable or revocable living trusts do not really do a whole lot from an asset protection standpoint. They're great tools to use to plan your estate and to avoid probate and things like that. But if we're worried about the next step of estate planning and dealing with how we prepare for long-term care planning, we may use certain types of those other types of asset protection trusts, which may be irrevocable in nature.
Okay, great, because, you know, that is confusing. We were talking about wills and my circle of friends as well, and oh no, you should get a trust and put your will within your trust. And I'm thinking, well, I have a will, but I don't have a trust, and why should I? And so, you know, and we're not going to answer all of those questions today on the call. I just want people to understand the importance of not trying to do it yourself. You want to get it done right, and seeking out an attorney to get that in place for you is you're paying yourself back.
Well, absolutely. And people generally speaking, two threats to their estate. One would be taxes. If I pass away, am I going to owe estate or inheritance taxes, what some people call it? And then the other threat is long-term care. Now, taxes have now become a little less of a threat to the average person because a single or widowed individual or unmarried person can pass away now, you know, and with $5.25 million this year after all of the congressional hullabaloo in the last couple of months. That's the estate tax limit. So if I passed away today with less than $5.25 million, which I would,
which I think most of society would.
That's right. Most people would not pay any estate taxes. And some states are different. Some states have lower estate taxes, but many states, especially in the South, are like Georgia, in as much as if you don't owe federal at the $5.25 million, you don't owe state as well. They're coupled to the estate tax. Now, we see a lot of northeastern states, which is why a lot of people migrate south to Florida and such. You know, you may not owe any federal if you die in Connecticut, for instance, but you may owe on, you know, state estate taxes or inheritance taxes on anything over let's just throw a number out there, 300,000. Some states have very much lower thresholds. And that's one of the reasons for the snowbirds to come down permanently at end of life, simply financial reasons, in addition to probably weather reasons.
Well, heck, you could buy a $3 million home and still make out $2 million.
That's right. That's exactly right. So most people that we see don't have tax issues. Okay, so the only threat is the long-term care potential threat to their estate. The $6,000 to $10,000 per month that they might end up paying for long-term care, and so that's the impetus for doing this type of planning. So there are many estate planning attorneys out there that can do a lot of tax planning and end-of-life planning, what happens to your assets after you're gone, who gets what. But very few know how to, do what we do in the elder law arena, which is, well, let's talk about planning to protect assets while you're alive. Mm-hmm. And again, that is, the general focus of my practice. For instance, will-based planning, doesn't do a whole lot, because that only comes into being your last will and testament after you've passed away. It doesn't control anything while you're alive. It just says who is in charge, your executor, once you pass away, and who everything goes to, the beneficiaries of your will. So it doesn't do a whole lot in terms of while you're living to protect your assets.
I see. And so that's why we want to make people not crisis planning clients, but pre-planning clients. And so so you talked a little bit about an irrevocable trust. Is that typically what people are doing nowadays, or are they doing revocable trusts more often now?
I see a lot of people that have done trust planning, and they will typically have revocable living trusts. And they will come to me because now they may have done that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and now they're wondering about, long-term care. How are we going to do that? I've tried to get long-term care insurance, and maybe I can't get it now. Mm. And I come to this elder law attorney to say, can you look at what we've got and see if it does what we need done? And I will talk about the long-term care planning aspects and say, well, if you're worried about long-term care costs, what you have here is something that's not really going to accomplish those goals. It is a great tool that you hired someone to do to avoid probate and to manage your estate after you're gone. However, it doesn't do anything for long-term care. We may consider doing, an irrevocable trust to plan ahead. Now, keeping in mind, getting back to the Medicaid conversation, Medicaid has this, what they call a 5-year look-back window. It used to be 3 years, but now it's 5 years after the Deficit Reduction Act was passed in 2006. Was signed into law in 2006. And, that is a window of time that if someone needs and applies for help from Medicaid in a long-term care facility or community, they will look back 5 years to see whether you've transferred any assets to children, to one of these types of irrevocable trusts, and Medicaid will ultimately penalize a person for giving away assets in the last 5 years.
Which, again, is why the day you hear a diagnosis of dementia is the day you need to go and see an elder care attorney.
Absolutely, because just because you have, a recent diagnosis, an early diagnosis, doesn't mean you're not competent right now. And it doesn't mean that you're going to need care right now. But what it does mean is that you're going to need some help down the road unless we find a cure to these things.
Okay. I'm looking at my producer. She's teasing me. We have 5 minutes left, Jeannie, and I always go over. So many important things to talk about. And we haven't even talked about VA benefits or special needs. So thank you for that overview. We got a little bit more than an overview there, but great information for our audiences and listeners about wills and trusts and POAs and healthcare directives. But now I do want to talk about VA benefits.
Sure.
Because a lot of people do not know that there are benefits out there to assist them.
No, it's one of the most underutilized benefits that exists. And what we're talking about, there's two ways, and I'll try to be brief, two ways for someone to be compensated by the VA. One is for a veteran who's got a service-connected injury, and that's called compensation. That's not a needs-based. If I was injured in Vietnam, I'm going to get some 10% increment of disability from the VA. What we're talking about is a VA pension, typically with aid and attendance. There are 3 levels of the pension, and there's a lot of information that spells it out on my website. But what it is, it's basically a pension. It's a needs-based, kind of like Medicaid, in which the VA will help compensate a veteran or a surviving spouse of a veteran for their out-of-pocket expenses that are paying for their care. And for instance, a single veteran can get a little over $1,700 per month. A surviving spouse of a veteran can get a little over $1,000 a month. And
that's a lot of money.
Yeah, a married veteran can get a little over $2,000 a month. And it's needs-based, but think about infusing that amount of income on a monthly basis into someone's fixed income already situation to help pay for care. It can go miles to get the care we need.
Oh, Lord. $1,000 is a lot of money, and people aren't accessing it. It's crazy. We have got to get the word out. So it's called the Aid and Attendance Benefit under VA benefits, and it's based on need. So you have to have a need and you have to qualify.
That's correct.
But what people don't understand, they may know that veterans get special benefits, but they don't understand that the surviving spouse also gets benefits.
Right. Yeah, think about the greatest generation, that's of age now, and, all those veterans that are out there still from World War II in Korea, and their surviving spouses if the veteran has passed away. There are just millions of them out there, and so many of them don't know about this.
Very good information. Again, I'm going to ask you to give your contact information, Patrick, at this point especially, because there is such a lack of knowledge of this, and if you have more questions, you can contact Patrick. Patrick, do you want to give your website and phone number again for me?
Absolutely. You can reach us on the web at elderlawyer.com. And we've got a toll-free number as 1-877-ELDER-45, or our local number is 706-826-1500.
Okay, and again, folks, I don't talk about this often, but after all of these shows, we also put these up on our website at homesteadhopefoundation.org. So you can access archives by whatever month and hear this as well. So remember to let people know if you're listening and they haven't listened and you know that they could use the advice of what Patrick's saying today, direct them to the homesteadhopefoundation.org website, and this show should be up there for them to listen to as a tape show in 2013. We only have a couple minutes left, Patrick, so we didn't get to special needs patients, but to special needs the special needs community. So if you have questions about that too, Patrick specializes in that as well. But do you just want to recap the top 3 things that you want people to know in terms of planning for their future?
Well, sure. I think the most important thing I want people to know that it is never too late to plan, even if you are in that crisis mode. A lot of people think that it's too late to plan. So the most important thing is, I would say, whenever you're dealing with a long-term care issue, no matter how late in the game it is, seek out a competent elder law professional to look at what your options are. That's the most important thing for me.
Okay.
And quite honestly, is reaching out when there's a need. I'd rather you reach out ahead of time, but even in the 11th hour, there are a lot of things we can do.
You're not in it alone, and please seek help because, again, you're paying yourself back. We've run out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Jeannie Pete. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day and week ahead, and listen here same time next week and every week. Homestead Hope Foundation is your resource for a healthy life. God bless.